probably notorious episode 17 of season 3 Atlantis Sunday. It might be a good point to talk about Dr. Beckett as a character and also to touch on a little bit of his research project and some of the resulting things that happened with that, with the Wraith and with another character known as Michael. And so, yeah, maybe we could start by saying our initial impressions and thoughts on Dr. Beckett.
Yes. Do you want to start or should I?
You can start if you want.
Oh, okay.
Why
Yeah,
not?
why not? I've always really loved Dr. Beckett, like definitely like one of my favorite characters. Like I just like I think I'd said to you like when we first started talking about Atlantis, like I just something about it, like, I just really liked about him, like, partially because he's Scottish and, like, I love everything about Scotland, and I live in Scotland, and, like so, like, that immediately kinda drew me to the character, but just also his character in general, like, he's just, like, such a kind yet smart character, and he never and funny too, like, there's some really funny moments with his character with who is it? With McKay
Hmm.
and others that like yeah, I just find his character very endearing and yeah, so initially from the start I've always just really loved his character. Even though technically I guess he's not a main character, but he feels like a main character to me because I feel like you see him a lot. So,
Yeah,
but what was your initial impression of Dr. Beckett?
yeah. I mean, yeah, first I'll share that my impression, and then I'll also say that what you just brought up is kind of leading into what I thought would be kind of a good second thing to mention here. But um, I actually also really love Beckett the minute that he showed up on screen. Like, there's something they made the character extremely likable. They made it almost like this character you identify with because, like, in a way, um, everybody on the team was kind of like doing this type of thing, and I know they all had a little bit of reprehension and like fear about going to Atlantis and doing this unknown thing, but in a way back it was kind of like he was a doctor working on this, and they made him have this personality that like he was always like on the one hand really curious and doing these things, but he also had a lot of, in a different way than McKay, he had a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety about things in a way that I think is really identifiable,
Yeah.
especially coming from the, putting yourself in situations that are very dangerous. And, but I also think it's so endearing that at the same time, he did everything he could to save people, even though he had this fears. And I thought that made his character for me even more
Yes.
likable
Yeah.
because it was very realistic. He wasn't like this person that was just, oh, completely brave and heroic about everything. And so, of course, it's easy for him to jump himself into these situations. It was like he actually would do anything to save people. And sometimes that meant he had to deal with his own fears and his own, like, like things that he really didn't want to do in order to do what
Yeah.
he needed to do.
Yeah.
Um, I thought there's an episode, I mean, maybe we can touch on it, but I can't remember the episode name, but the one where they kind of are on that planet where the Wraith thing is affecting them, and you see that the thing his patient keeps passing away, and that's the thing that he's struggling with. Like he has to keep
Oh,
saving
yeah, I know
patients,
which one you're talking
right?
about. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of shows like that's his innermost fear or his the thing that he really needs to do. But something you mentioned also brought something up that I, was thinking about when I was kind of thinking, oh, we should talk about Beckett, and that is that unlike in SG1, I think they made a lot of these sort of side characters more main characters
Yeah.
outside of the initial team. And I know they had doctors in SG1, and I know that they played kind of heavy roles, but especially in the beginning of the show, they didn't quite have the same introduction and immediate character portrayal as part of a core group as Beckett did. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt the same way, but I felt like he was immediately introduced, and even though he wasn't part of the four-member venturing party, I really thought he's a member of the cast. Like, so,
Yeah, I really feel like they kind of blur the lines as to who the main cast is in a sense because it's like him and then also Zelenka. More so him though. I think he's in it a lot more. But there's just certain characters that show up that from the start that at first you're like I think at first glance, like, you don't know, like, "Oh, are they, like is something gonna make them, like, a main character?" You know? You don't initially know, like, and, yeah, I definitely feel like they certainly have, like, more things going on in the supporting roles, and that's kind of also why I kinda think, Ford got the shitty end of the stick because I felt like they kind of treated him as an afterthought. And I know we're not talking about him, but I think that's why that stood out so much because with the supporting characters there was so much going on within just how the characters were, how Beckett is like has so much like personality and different things to his character, and then you had someone that was supposed to be a main character such as Ford, and he just kind of always seemed like the writers had him as an afterthought until then they upped what kind of happened with his character, but that was basically then to get him off of the show, which was a shame. And so yeah, that's just kind of my opinion in terms of like supporting characters, like maybe why that point also stood out to me quite as much.
Yeah, for sure. And I kind of question with Atlantis because it's a little bit of a different situation. Maybe that's why they kind of had to deviate a little bit from this. And also, I mean, I guess TV had evolved by then. In 1997, when SG-1 first came out, TV was at a very different place than
Yeah.
like 8 years later when, or 7 years later when Atlantis came out. And I think also SG-1 had developed, and by that point, SG-1 had started to have a lot of supporting characters that had more of a role or more of an integration, or they had started to integrate more supporting characters. And so I think it's partially that, but I think also it makes a lot of sense for the plot of Atlantis and for the whole setting of it that a doctor character would play such a prevalent role. And
Yeah, yeah,
I
definitely.
know that's the case also in SG-1, but I feel like Beckett had to travel way more. He had to do a lot more in the field, and I think that was also partially they had him really integrated with the research of the ancient DNA, which was an integral part of the story, and then also research with the Wraith project, which was another integral part of the story. So I feel like they gave him a lot more material that was really important to the overall like main plot. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess too, what's interesting is they do that in Atlantis, I think, more so because like when I'm watching SG-1, you know, the later seasons alongside with Atlantis kind of back and forth. That's one thing actually that I've realized, like as I'm almost done with season 10, um, that Dr. Lamb really isn't in it that much. Like for some reason I had a memory of like her being a bigger role in it for some reason. I don't know why. Like, and so it's interesting that they chose to have that character in SG-1 just kind of initially kind of be in the show, like, and then suddenly she was just kind of gone, even though technically her character is still there. And then with Atlantis, definitely Beckett, I think from the point of when you see him till he sadly leaves the show, like he's a pretty strong character throughout. Like I don't think there's ever a point where like he's missing all that much. Like at least I can't think of any points where like I noticeably like noticed him like missing for a bunch of episodes or something.
Hmm. No, it's completely true. Whereas I think, I mean, Dr. Frasier appeared, for example, already in season 1 of Stargate, but the character didn't appear continuously. It was mostly she was brought in when there was a medical problem or when she needed to be there. And then I think later on, because people like the character and because maybe there were more relevant plot lines, she was brought in more and more. I think with Dr. Lamb, it's a little bit practical. Like I think the actress had various maternity leaves, so it was a bit
Oh,
practical why the character wasn't there. I mean, that's also
okay.
why
I
Michael
didn't
Shanks
know.
was
Yeah.
missing from a couple episodes at the time.
Oh, okay.
Um, but I also think it's just the way that they wrote it in SG-1 that the that character didn't have such a the doctor character, whether it was, Frasier or Lamb, didn't have such a close um sort of integration with the team. And I think that they started to develop that with Frasier towards the end, and I think they added some things with Dr. Lamb that were kind of they could have been developed further, especially because, with this relationship with the general and everything. I
Yeah.
think it would have been developed much further if the show went on longer. So perhaps
Yeah.
if the show went on a couple more seasons, we would have seen more of Dr. Lamb. But I think somehow in Atlantis that element was just built in more. Like it was just built in a little bit more to the story. And it almost kind of makes me think like, when we're talking about how they designed the initial team and how they designed it with Ford. And I think they were trying to, I mean, not trying to, but they were using as a model that the team of how they did SG-1. And I
Mhm.
know in SG-1 they didn't have a doctor. Um, but it's interesting because when you look at Atlantis, kind of how Tilk made a lot of sense being on SG-1 because he had knowledge of the gold and he had certain skills they didn't have, like the rest of the team didn't have. And in this case, actually, Beckett has skills more complementary to the rest of the team than Ford did in a way, that
Mhm.
were necessary for the, the project, basically, because actually, in many ways, I think the genetic research and things and information about the Wraith are more integral than necessarily being someone that can shoot in Atlantis
Yeah.
for the most part. Um, so I thought that this is kind of interesting to think about. Like, I wonder if, had they thought about it now, would it be designed differently that maybe Beckett would have been more the main character? Um, because actually, I think in an alternate reality of SG-1 and one of the main, uh, like one of these sort of parallel universe things, Dr. Fraser was one of the primary four, like the
Yeah.
team. So I don't know. I mean, it's something like I have thought about a little bit. Like, was he really core member in a way?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the way they had his character was perfect. Like I don't think in my opinion like they should have like had him on like the team of like going out and stuff, but like I mean, I know he went out, but I mean he wasn't one of the main, right? Um yeah, I just really like how they wrote for that character specifically. I just think it worked really nicely throughout. Um and Yeah, I think that's all I was gonna say. Sorry, my mind wandered for a second. I was,
Well,
like,
it's
thinking of,
interesting
like,
because they make him an instantly sympathetic character because the first thing you see of all the characters in Atlantis, and I think it's how they sort of are introducing them, and it's really hard. Like it is, this is we have to recognize how complicated and difficult this issue is. That you have basically the behemoth that is SG-1 that has just had like the most epic final episodes ever, and is like at a peak, and Atlantis is introduced, and somehow they have to come up with characters that people resonate with immediately while they're watching also the premiere of SG-1 because they aired on the same day, back to back. And so I think the way they introduced Beckett, within like seconds you like him, and it's like they make it who they're saying goodbye to, and they have him saying goodbye to his mom, and it's really sweet, like the whole thing. Like it makes you immediately like, on the one hand you feel kind of sorry for him because you realize, oh, he's actually probably very lonely because like the only person he's saying goodbye to is his mom, and then it's also sweet
yeah.
because he's saying goodbye to his mom, and then but he's also like kind of a mess, and so it's like you immediately are like, oh, I really like this character.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I had forgotten about that part.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's
Yeah.
like they had to. I mean, it's kind of a difficult thing because in SG-1, I mean, and I very recently rewatched the pilot, but it's interesting because the first thing they introduce is the conflict. The goal will come back, and it's very
Are you
like
talking about, like, the very beginning
the very,
beginning of
very beginning,
SG-1?
the pilot
Oh,
episode, the
okay.
first thing they do to introduce it, to get the storyline going again, is that the Ghoul will come through the gate and they take some members, and that's how it immediately pulls people into it. And with Atlantis, they already have the main plot established. They're going to go to Atlantis, and they have to go there in order for the like any conflict to happen. And I think part of the issue there is that since they're not already there, you have to get people to watch it for long enough that they see it. And I think that made it that one of the things they really had to put forth right away was a way to get people invested in the characters. And
Yeah.
so I think that's also perhaps why maybe right off the bat a lot of the characters are a lot more developed. Um, I also kind of wonder if they weren't so developed, would we have felt differently about Ford because he might have been developed later, kind of like characters in SG1 did.
Yeah. It would be
Um,
really fascinating to like hear like the writers that wrote on the show, like to hear like their process and like how they planned for Atlantis, like what their process was with all of that. I think would be fascinating to hear because like
yes.
we talk about it a lot, like we talk a lot about episodes and how we feel like how well it was written or like and certain things just with it that it would be really fascinating to actually hear because it's just like a lot of like guessing like oh I wonder
Mhm.
like logically it makes sense like the things that you mentioned that they probably had to think about but yeah it's interesting for sure and another thing I noticed with Atlantis too that I think um maybe makes sense with the supporting characters kind of being feeling like a main thing, especially with Beckett, is that, like, if you think about it with Atlantis, it was a ton of scientists, right? Like, there was a few
Yeah.
military, a ton of scientists. Like, initially, their purpose wasn't for, at least I don't think it was. I don't think their purpose was for exploring and battling like SG-1. Their purpose was to study Atlantis, right?
Yes.
Um, and so you have people like Beckett that are on there for that reason, figuring like, there's not going to be too much going on. Like, if the people aren't going around like battling things and, they never knew about the Wraith and all of that, um, that they all kind of bond together because they're all kind of scared because they don't expect what actually happens to happen is how I kind of see it and felt that maybe that's why like there's certain supporting characters that you see more of and there's more to their character because it would make sense just like as humans for everyone to kind of bond together um whereas with SG1 it's kind of like it's military, like, they know, like, they're on a mission to explore other lands, like, there's a very set, like, focus for each team, where at first with this team, the focus was supposed to be something different until it all kind of exploded in their face.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And it's also like, yeah, this in SG1 they're venturing from their comfort zone, their home. I mean, I guess it's kind of like siblings. Like siblings will fight a lot when they're in their home, but if they're in situations where they're less comfortable, they will stop fighting
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
because
that's very true.
so it's like basically Atlantis is a bunch of siblings that are, in an unfamiliar situation and suddenly stopped fighting.
Yeah, except for McKay, he bickers with everyone.
Oh yeah. But you're right. I mean, I think they all are like I think in Stargate SG1 got very close because yeah, they were always in together in those situations that were, you know, life and death. But in Atlantis, you're absolutely right. They're kind of all in it together, literally. So it's a little bit more, I think, more of a bond between people. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, maybe that's why some civilian, specifically civilian characters stuck out a lot and really had such a prominent kind of like role and like placement in the show. Whereas in SG1, those characters were kind of more enhancements.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the things with Beckett that I think is definitely later on a main part of like his character is how he was the one that developed that I don't know what you call it. It was like the research for the Wraith, right?
Hmm.
In order to make the Wraith human. And I don't know, I guess just what are your initial thoughts on that? Like on all of that, because it's kind of, like, insane to me, like, I feel like there's multiple episodes about that, and you kind of see the effects it has on Michael, right? And the effects it has on Beckett in a sense for being the one that, was pushing for this. I don't know if you'd call it a drug, but, I guess he would, right? I don't, the basically makes them go human. Um, so yeah, anyways, what are your initial thoughts on all of that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that I think is a very important and complicated plot line.
Yeah.
Um, I think partially, one, I think it cements the importance of Beckett because he was working on the gene therapy. And then I don't know, like, it kind of is, it always is then the question, do you ask like for the writers or for people involved in the show? Because you always have these things in Stargate. Did this plot line of kind of removing the Wraith DNA, was that kind of made major, and then as a result, you have more Dr. Beckett, or did they have Dr. Beckett's character there, realize people liked him, and this was something they could do, so they kind of played on this more. But the research itself, I think, is really fascinating because it's one of those things in Stargate, which I love because they're so like not black and white and they're very complex. And I think the first time they really show this being used is the episode where I think, isn't it the episode where there's that girl and she has been like living with a human, so the guy thinks her wraith is suppressed for the most part, but then you find out it's kind of not really all that true. And I think this is where Dr. Beckett tries to use the therapy, but it doesn't quite work. But then they continue to develop it. And I think that already begs this interesting question of, I mean, their enemy,
Oh,
they're like an enemy,
yeah.
right? They're an enemy and they have this part of them that evolved, that kind of, they evolved from this thing that it kind of, I guess, is combined with human DNA, or like is somehow there is some human DNA there. Um, but that part of them is what makes them wraith and not human. But it's like, okay, on the one hand, they're enemies and they're doing this thing, but they're not actually doing it out of something evil. Or we're kind of modifying them to protect ourselves, which is a very complicated thing because it's begs one of those other questions of, okay, who has the right to live. Um, but I thought the episode where they really introduce it, which is the episode where Michael is introduced, and I mean, I would love to hear the thoughts on this one because this is so complicated, and like the episode made me feeling so, it was one of those things where you're like, did they really do the right thing? Did they have a hard time making the decision to do the right thing? Because they basically gave this wraith the therapy, it worked, it turned him human, but then they lied to him and told him he was human. And so, of course, he got very angry when he discovered the truth. And so, I mean, my initial reactions to that were, on the one hand, you get very frustrated with the team. On the other hand, you're like, but I really like this because it shows that they're, not infallible and that they can make poor decisions and that sometimes their poor decisions have very big consequences. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I had forgotten that they introduced the what is it called? Gene therapy? Is that what it's called?
yes.
Um, with that other character. I'd completely forgotten about that. Like for some reason I was thinking of that all starting when you get introduced to the Michael character, but you're very right that that's where it first like comes in. And yeah, I mean it's such a I've went back and forth a lot with my thoughts on it all because it's kind of like which again is something that they do a lot in Stargate, I think. Because I can totally see how it's like from a human standpoint, you have these evil creatures that are terrifying that suck the life out of you and are vicious and scary and you find a way to neutralize that, and you find a way to have it be that they could potentially be human, and when they're human they actually act human for the most part, and seem kind, and seem like they could actually live a full complete life, that I can see how, like, there's the element of thinking that that's really good and that
Yeah.
that is a good decision. But then you think about it from, what happens with Michael, and how his character actually makes you think about it in a different way, because you see how hurtful it is to him, how it's like, of course, if you're being lied to, like, that's not okay, and that would make you very mad. You see how it makes him, you know, very angry and very frustrated and very hateful then towards them. Um, and it's like it makes sense because they were also putting him through what seemed like a form of torture in a sense, because
Yes.
of giving him the therapy and trying to get it to work, and you see all this like old footage of him just like screaming and being tied to a bed, and all this stuff, and then when the roles are reversed, when, like, you go forward to a bunch of other episodes where Michael's involved, and maybe say he captures Taylor and like ties her to a bed, and like, basically, wants to, in a sense, torture her. And it's like he's saying it's no different. And
Yeah.
it isn't any different because he was researching those nasty bugs to
Yeah.
find a way to protect himself. And so it's like you can see how, like, both sides are basically doing the same thing. And then I was thinking about it and I'm just like, if you kind of like switch it to regular real world life and you think of like animals and, for
Yep.
example, or snakes have to eat things, they have to hunt, they have to go after things, other animals have to do that in order to survive. And like, while I hate it, as a vegan, I hate the fact that the world is like that. um it's just part of the world and they have to do that to survive. So in a sense, then you think of the Wraith, they have to have their source of food or whatever you would call it in order to live, just like humans do. And so it's like, while they're terrifying looking, and that's why one would think like, oh, they're wrong and we're right because they look like monsters. It's really not like that. And so then I can see how, then going back to Beckett being the one that then, has put all this research and time and energy into this and really pushed for this to be like tested, I think, on Michael, I believe. I can see how then that character starts to really feel, I think, I can't remember fully like what episode it's in, but I believe there are some episodes where he's really questioning himself on that and feeling terrible for even coming up with it. And so yeah, and I do like how they linked it to his character, because I feel like it just gave more of a storyline with him as well, and made sense because clearly he's the doctor in the story. But yeah. So I think
Yeah.
it's an interesting part for them to have in it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And I mean, I think it's totally true. It'd be like, yeah, imagine like a mouse genetically modifying a snake so that it changed into a mouse. And I mean, I think it's also perfect that they had Beckett because he has such a heavy conscience all the time. And this is like such an ethical question. Like, is this even ethically, like, is there any way in which this is ethically okay? And I think it's interesting because when they went through with it, the way they execute, because when you think about it, the concept of it is not like when you think, okay, this thing has to eat people to survive. We're both living here. There could also be ways in which maybe they could modify the wraith, that the wraith could live on something else. Like, for example, that they're still wraith.
Yeah.
Maybe they, evolve to have a way of eating that doesn't harm other beings. I mean, humans obviously can, they have evolved ways to exist without eating animals, and they've exist in ways to create supplementation so that things that you can't, that you may not. maybe couldn't get before on any given vegan diet you can get easily, because we have
Yeah.
to do that. And so I think it's a very they could have done something very similar with Wraith and gone that route. And so I think it makes a lot of sense that, yeah, Dr. Beckett is very, like, on the one hand, it's his research. On the other hand, he's like, probably almost like he feels this sense of like despair and disgust about it because it's very questionable. And I like the fact that they behave like it's questionable. I also think it makes sense that they make these wrong decisions sometimes because, when you think about it, they're also probably very desperate. They, they're fighting for their life in a situation that is, completely outside of the realm. Um, but I do think it's very, like, I guess they almost probably look at it like, like if you think they've been dealing with a Goa'uld, and with a Goa'uld, it's like, oh, there's this part of them that makes them Goa'uld, and when you remove it, they become the host again. And I think especially because that connection could so easily be made, oh, it's this bug that, you even saw it latch on to Shepard and kind of function is like in this sort of almost parasitical way that I could see the thinking process that could maybe lead one to sort of make the thinking around the two very similar. Like, oh, if you remove this Arades bug thing, then the human part comes back. But the difference is the Wraith were never actually human. It's not like there's this person that was kind of their being, their consciousness is all this Wraith. So
Yeah.
it's very
Yeah.
complex. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you were saying about how, like, they could have done the research to make it that they feed differently, like, then that was making me think of how, like, with Teal'c, how, like, they no longer need the symbiote, right? Like, they have
Yep.
the injection of, is it Trutonin? Is that what it's called?
Yes, totally.
Um, yeah, if they would have thought of some sort of injection that they could all have. I think too with the Wraith, it's just like their personalities as well are so scary and like not willing to listen. Like there's no like with the Goa'uld, like they could try and like negotiate things sometimes. Like whereas with the Wraith you can't really negotiate with them. Like it seems like it's just like they want to kill the humans and that's that.
Yeah,
Except I mean Michael's a bit different though, right? But uh, usually you can't really, and then there was that one Wraith that was, kept captive that was a bit different as well.
hmm
Oh wait,
that
I
saves
don't know if
Shepard.
you've seen that, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
The one that's
Oh,
yeah.
I got worried. I said something for a second.
Yeah, no,
Um, but yeah, yeah, so it's interesting for sure. Um, and I guess like I don't know how long we've been talking. Maybe this will be a shorter episode. I don't know. I feel like it's kind of shorter, but I guess that kind of brings us to the saddest part of everything, which is talking about Beckett and what happens with him, like where he then dies, which oh my gosh. Like I'm so sad about like I guess like first I'll ask you though, like what was your reaction to that episode of where that happens?
yeah. I mean, so okay, I just a disclaimer, I remembered that he died when I started rewatching Atlantis, so I knew that happened. I didn't know when it
Okay.
happened. And I do remember that when I first watched it, when I saw that he died, it was kind of like, what the hell just happened? Like that can't be real. Like tell me this is all a dream or something. I was very, very surprised. Um, but this time it was funny because, I've been watching Atlantis and SG-1 concurrently, and I think it's during a time when there's a lot of these episodes that say 10 hours earlier or something. And I just remember going, oh, it's another one of those. Because I didn't remember that that was the episode that he died, and I didn't remember exactly what happened. But then as things started happening, I started piecing it together because he never got to go fishing. And like this this whole thing and
Yeah.
I remember like thinking, "Oh yeah, that's right." I remember my initial reaction. I was so sad because like on the one hand he died and I was very sad about that. But on the other hand, I remember like, "Oh, but it's so terrible that he never got to go fishing. Like this is like the most unfair bit of it all that he just wanted to have his damn day off and go fishing and he never got to." And that like it kind of like haunted me forever that I felt really bad that he didn't get to do that last thing that that everybody was just blowing him off.
Yeah.
Uh, but I thought it was also extremely, extremely well done. Um, because, usually they have these episodes where everything is down to the last minute, but it works out, like, and they had, he was doing the surgery and you're kind of anxious, but it works, okay? And the surgery works, and then you have to get the thing into the bomb container, and it's at the last second, but usually in those situations in the Stargate episodes, it works. Like you're kind of on edge, but okay, it's gonna be fine. He's gonna get it in at the last second. But this one, it just took you so much by surprise because it just went off right before he got it in, and you're just like, oh my God, like what
Ugh.
just happened?
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah. No, this was a hard one for me, to be honest. Like, it literally, like, felt like it was like the feeling stuck with me afterwards. Like, I felt like I had, like, was grieving someone. It was the weirdest thing. I'm just like, "What is wrong with me? This is just a show." Like, I was truly so sad. Like, after the show, I still felt horrible, and, like, I went, like, into my daughter's room, and I'm like, "My character died. I'm so sad." And I literally started tearing up. Like, I was so sad. He's just like, I think it hit me even more than, like, Frasier,
Hmm.
Dr. Frasier. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it was really well done. I had forgotten that he died in Atlantis, from the
Oh
first
no.
time, but what had happened was I had an inkling that something was gonna happen to him because when I was, I don't know if it was on, like, a Facebook page or something, someone commented in a way that made it sound like something eventually happened to him,
Uh-huh.
and so it's just like, "Oh, no." Like, like, it was kind of like a little bit of a spoiler because I didn't remember, but then I wasn't always fully sure, and then I think I saw something written somewhere else too that made me kind of figure, "Okay, something must eventually happen to him," but I didn't know when it was gonna happen, so I didn't know it was gonna be then. And like you said, everything runs to the last minute and then everyone's fine. And like, um, I think partway through the episode, I was pretty sure that was the episode that it was going to happen. So I was kind of like sad throughout the whole thing, thinking, oh no. And then like, just how they did it, like, th I guess they kind of did a similar thing that they did in a sense when they killed off Dr. Frasier, is that they had it be sudden, and that was it. Like, they didn't have them, like, trying to rush and get him help or anything like that. It was just that you see the explosion and you know that he's gone, and then the next thing you see is, like, the funeral, basically. And, like, so it's kind of similar to what they did with Dr. Frasier, where it was just, like, sudden. And then I thought that was kind of interesting because 'cause I'm just like, "Oh, well, both of them were doctors, both of them were killed off the show, and both of them it was, like, a sudden thing." So there's like those similarities in a sense, to where like,
Totally.
um, it's kind of, and I think with her episode as well, wasn't it kind of 10 hours earlier or whatever kind of thing, or whatever, kind of went back and forth in the time frame of stuff to then figure out what happened, I think.
Yeah,
And
well, I
it,
think what they did with that one is the way you found out was looking through the camera, which would have happened earlier. So it didn't explicitly say it, I don't think, but they did something where because remember the director, he picked up Daniel's tape and he watched it, and that's how
yeah,
you found out what happened. And
yeah,
so it's kind of like, but to me, like what I feel was a bit more in a way like it just shocked you a little bit more with this is that in Heroes they're really preparing you for somebody dying. Like you knew it was someone the whole time, and at the end it hits you because it's
true,
Dr.
yeah,
Frasier, and so you go, oh, like, and it's sad because, but you know that someone's gonna die. And in this episode, it's not a two-parter. It was just like a, usually the episodes leading into the finale, they're usually just fun fillers. I mean, if you look on the SG1 side, you have the episode with like Vala's dad, which is kind of more of like they have a lot of kind of character development episodes and things like that, or fun episodes. I mean, Ergo was an episode like this, kind of before the end. And so you have this episode that is like near the end, so you are not really expecting it to be so grandiose like this or have something be that hard hitting. This is something you'd expect in like the mid season or the end season, and so it's kind of like it gets you. And to me, that was what was really hard. I think the first time I watched it, is it's just I couldn't. I thought, oh, this has to be not real. This has to be the next episode. They're gonna say it was a dream or didn't really happen or something like that. I don't know. Um, I mean, especially because I knew it happened in season three, but to be honest, I thought when I was watching through season three, and then you have Dr. Beckett stuck on the island of all the race turned humans, I totally thought it was going to be that episode that he was
Oh,
killed
yeah.
in because I was like, oh my God, he's there all by himself. He's surrounded by all these, like, Wraith turned human, turned back Wraith that, like, probably want to kill him. And so
Yeah.
he's not going to make it. And so I honestly had mentally prepared myself during that
Oh
episode
gosh.
because I knew what happened, and I was like, "Oh, no," and I was, like, so relieved when he
Yeah.
got through, but then it's like, I knew it happened in season 3, but it's just that particular episode, and then I think partway through I remembered, I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's right," because I remember thinking when I first watched it, like, the first time through, I didn't think that anything could like, that episode just seemed like a filler, like, it was just a fun filler episode, and I think again when I rewatched it this time, I just thought that that guy that was like hitting on Weir was going to be the bomber. Like I thought that's what they were trying to allude to. So
Yeah, I thought that too. I thought that too.
really, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the whole episode was just very strange. Like not in a bad way, but it was just very different from their usual episodes.
Hmm.
Um that it was very unique, but I think really well done. I think the part that makes it even so much more of a gut wrencher is how at the very end, after he's passed, and you have McKay standing out, outside, in Atlantis, and just kind of like imagining as if Beckett's there talking to him, and then he like disappears, and it's just like, oh,
Yeah. Oh, I know.
you're
It's
trying to
horrible.
kill me here with sadness. Like it's sad enough, and then you add that, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like it's just so like heartbreaking, and then it's like, I think, like, when he was, when they were taking away, like, the coffin, they're playing, like, the bagpipes and all of that, I think, and, like, I'm just like, those always make me sad, so it's
Oh, I
just
know. Yeah. It's really like you can't
really
not cry.
layering
You
on the
can't.
sadness.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I think they did this so well because they made you really, really, really upset because like you're not just upset that he passed away, you're upset that he didn't get to go fishing, you're upset that he didn't get his day off, you're upset that like I mean basically everything about him, like it just makes you so sad because already when he's introduced in the show, you're sad for him and like you want so many good things to happen to him. Like I don't know, like I felt that when I'm like, oh, I want all good things to happen to this guy. And he's like one of those
Yeah.
people somehow, even though they're such a good person and they're doing all these fantastic things, it's like they don't ever seem to have like the good things happen to them. You know what I mean? Like they don't seem to be the lucky.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of
Yeah.
what like made him so like you really want something positive to happen, and then it's like in the end, it's like he didn't even get to go fishing. Like
Yeah. And he did exactly what you were saying in the beginning when you're talking about one of the things you liked about how his character always kind of like fights to do the right thing in a sense, for his patients and things like that. It's like that's what basically got him in the end, right? Because he was
yep,
trying to save everyone and it's interesting because it's also, like, how many other people died in that, like, they didn't mention it because clearly it wasn't even characters that were ever seen, but it was like there was that guy, right, that was there
mhm,
that, like, he handed it to, and then they put it in and then walked away and then it exploded, so that guy died too, but there wasn't, like, mention of anyone else dying, which I guess, like, makes sense in the grand scheme of things, but at the same time, you would think, like, there'd maybe be a slight mention of the other people too. Um,
totally. I mean, I think they mentioned, in the beginning, oh, there was an explosion, X amount of people died, X many people were hurt, but they didn't mention who. So, I mean, yeah, that's true. That's very true. But what I do appreciate about this, like, and I think that this is very important, and it's one of my favorite parts about the episode. The guy who he did the surgery on, did survive.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I thought that was very important, and it's, like, very telling, and it's like, okay, this person, their life saved. I thought that was similar to, like, Heroes, how, the guy who was having the baby, he lived, and he lived
Yeah.
because of Dr. Fraser, and I think this guy, he lived because of, Dr. Beckett, and so
Yeah.
I
It's
love that
interesting how
aspect.
they have yeah, me too. Yeah. It's interesting how they have like a lot of little similarities and even little similarities with things that are just kind of silly, like with the fishing thing. It's like they kind of had that as a joke with Jack O'Neill when
It's
he was
true,
never
yeah.
getting to go fishing and he was always trying to get Sam to go fishing with him and something would always pop up that they could never go fishing. It's like, what is it with the fishing?
Yeah, maybe the writers have to say, were they really into fishing? Was one of them, like, doing fishing as a hobby? I don't know. Like, it's because you're right, it was an O'Neill thing, and you're right that the characters always kinda blew him off, and then there were
Yeah.
times when they would blow him off and then, like, something would happen or whatever, but, I mean, in the end, SG-1, it was, like, a happy ending because they were all fishing at the end before, O'Neill left. That was kind of, like, the conclusion of that. But poor Beckett, like, he didn't get to go to the mainland. He didn't even get to have his day off. Like, someone
Yeah.
had a headache
Yeah.
and that's why the whole thing, like, it made it just hurt more because you're like, oh my gosh, he basically is killed because he was being such a good person. And then it just makes you feel so, so horrible.
Yeah, and it's such a shame when characters get killed off because it's like you think like, oh, if they brought back a show where like some of the main characters had the chance to at least be on in some capacity, it's like, nope, not for the ones that died.
Yeah.
They have no choice. They cannot be on it anymore unless they've been
Yep.
resurrected.
Well, like they did with Daniel. And I think
True.
actually, when I saw Beckett with, Rodney at the end, I totally thought they were gonna go the ascended angle with him, and
Oh,
have like, honestly, like, I thought that because, like, he was kind of appearing, and it was very similar to, like, when Daniel appeared to O'Neill, and so I thought, "Oh, okay, it's fine. He's gonna be back. He's ascended."
yeah. Oh, oh, that would have
Uh
been nice.
I know, right? It would have been nice. So, I mean, it's also
Right.
kind of a bummer because I feel like at this point they only kind of cracked the seal on that Wraith research. And to be honest, I don't know what comes back. Like I have to say, like I really don't know. I don't remember anything of season 4 and 5. I don't remember if that research comes back or we meet Michael again. Um, I know you've seen the
Yeah.
season finale, so maybe you already know, but like that kind of stuff I just can't remember. I'm pretty sure we do. Like I'm pretty sure he comes back. I know the Wraith come back because like I remember the Wraith coming back, but I just don't remember how or how that is kind of put
Yeah.
through or how any of that they kind of explored in the early parts, how that develops. Um
Yeah,
but
so since you've seen up to what episode in Atlantis so far?
I've basically seen everything except the finale, so I've seen until I think 18. So,
Okay.
yeah, in both SG-1 and Atlantis, I'm right before the season finale. Um,
Okay, just so people know in case they leave comments not to maybe mention anything about the final episode
yeah.
since Alyssa has not seen it yet. Um, because you are currently in the US, right? So,
Yeah, no, I'm kind of watching it in like a little watch group, and we can't watch it together. I mean, it's mostly for my daughter Vala. She's watching for her run through, and so since
yeah, you have to wait, yeah.
we have to wait until we're kind of all able to watch it. So I'm being
Yeah.
patient. Even though it's like the worst it was like the worst time to stop, uh, like, right before the season finale,
Yeah. Oh
but it's
my
no, it's all
gosh.
good.
So yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I
but
guess I guess that's basically it, right? Basically what we were going to talk about, and think it would just be really interesting to hear people that are listening or watching this, their thoughts on Beckett, like when he was first introduced into the show in the beginning, and how his character progressed, and then all the stuff we talked about, like what's your thoughts on it with like his research and then sadly his death, like um, I personally find that his death is one of the saddest ones of any of the characters that have
yes.
died off previously, and so I've found it the hardest, so I'm curious if anyone else felt that way as well.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Yeah, please tell us what you think. And were you as shocked? Because I have to say, I feel like the other deaths we were a little bit prepared for, at least somehow prepared in the episode. And I don't know if there was any kind of hints at it when it was first aired. I don't remember, but I know that it you're not prepared for this at all. It just happens, and that's why it almost seems like it's not real, right? So yeah, let us know what you think about that, and if you were as shocked as us. And I mean, yeah, I guess also, how do you feel about the Wraith human DNA, and how ethical is it to turn a Wraith into a human? And do you have any ideas for possible solution to that? I mean,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
very valid
So
question.
yep.